Hello, my name's Howard Williamson and I teach social policy here at the University of Glamorgan. I contribute to a third-year undergraduate module called Social Policy in Young People. That might sound rather dull, but it's really about young people's lives in the 21st century, considerable difficulties and challenges faced by some groups of young people, and certain kinds of issues that become contemporary political questions. What do we do about youth crime? What do we do about teenage pregnancy? What do we do about substance misuse? And within the social sciences, social policy is really what some people have called public sociology, which means that it's a more practical way of making a contribution to thinking about how we respond to some of those kinds of challenges. Now, some years ago, I developed, from my experience of being on public policy committees and working directly with young people as a youth worker and teaching about young people in higher education, I developed a framework that has 6 very simple questions that have very difficult answers. And that's what I want to spend the next few minutes talking about. They pair up into 3 groups of 2. The first pair of questions are really about the size of the problem and the different kinds of groups that might be within that particular challenge. For example, if we want to do something about substance misuse, how serious a problem is this? What is the scale of the problem? How many of young people have problematic substance misuse? It's often very difficult to interrogate those figures. What do they mean? Where do the messages come from about the data that we have? Recording and reporting is often very difficult to unravel. And we try to work out what the scale of the problem is, because if it's fairly insignificant, then there's not much point in committing a lot of public resources towards that issue. The second question, of course, is about the differentiation of that population that we've discovered. If it's a group of girls who've become pregnant at an early age, then have they all become pregnant for exactly the same reason? Probably not. What kinds of circumstances are they in? Often quite different circumstances. Some close to their families still, some alienated from their families. And how we break up that population affects how we decide to respond in terms of social policy, in terms of public policy. The third question and the fourth question are really about causes and consequences. How did these young people come to be in the situation they are in? What are the causal factors behind youth offending? Do these lie in individual motivation? Do they lie in family circumstances? Do they lie in school background and educational underachievement? Are they something to do with communities and peer groups? And of course, most people know that the answer is a combination of all of those things. But if we're to develop sensible policies for those young people, we have to think about what are the dominant factors that perhaps contribute to youth offending in a particular environment, or educational dropout, or school exclusion, or substance misuse. And then we have to think about mechanisms to address those particular contexts. So understanding causes is very important. But equally, from a political point of view, it's also important to work out what the consequences of not doing anything about some of these problems may be. And that often levers in a lot of political commitment and a lot of public money. Because if we discover that, for example, and this is true, that if you are not in education, employment or training at the age of 16, you are something like 8.5 times more likely to be unemployed when you're 26, with all the public costs attached to that, then that becomes a very good argument for doing something about the issue when people are 16. Of course, there is another argument that if nothing really happens negatively to these young people, despite their circumstances when they are teenagers, then perhaps we don't need to do anything. We let them grow out of it. And that was once an argument about crime. But it's no longer an argument about crime, because we know that young people who acquire criminal records face much more difficulty in getting work and in moving forward positively in their lives. The third pair of questions are not research questions. They're questions to do with the policy response that we make to those kinds of issues. So I've often depicted this as barriers and bridges. What are the barriers that we need to build in terms of early intervention so that we prevent young people becoming the sort of individuals engaging in the kind of behaviour that cause us concern and cause them a lot of difficulties? And the sixth question, the final one of the third pair, are the bridges that we need to build, because however much we endeavour to prevent some of these things happening, they will happen. And so we have to provide opportunities and bridges and pathways for young people, often young adults, to reconnect, to re-engage with mainstream positive pathways into adulthood. And by that I mean in pathways into family life, pathways into civic engagement and citizenship, and of course pathways into jobs. Now, this all sounds very rational, very useful, and of course the big frustration is that despite a lot of talk about evidence-based policy making, which is the mantra of the modern age, most policy is not always made on sensible and rational thinking. It's made on political direction and political whim. So academics who contribute to a public sociology have to endure the frustration of politicians making decisions that do not really fit very much with the kind of evidence that they can put on the table. But then academics are academics, providing understanding and interpretation, and politicians are politicians who have a democratic mandate to make decisions whether or not it makes sense according to the evidence.